The year was 1876, a time when the Black Hills shimmered with both promise and peril. In the shadow of the Great Sioux War, the Lakota people struggled to preserve their sacred lands while desperate settlers pushed into forbidden territory, driven by rumors of gold and visions of prosperity. This is the extraordinary tale of Running Wolf, a fierce Lakota warrior sworn to protect his tribe's hunting grounds by any means necessary, and Elizabeth Crawford, a recently widowed schoolteacher who ventured west seeking healing and purpose. After devastating loss, their paths were never meant to converge, yet when circumstances forced them together during the harshest winter in living memory, both discovered that the lines between enemies could fade through compassion and understanding. Their story shows us that even in times of bitter division, unexpected connections can forge bridges across seemingly unbridgeable chasms. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer sun hung heavy in the cloudless sky above the Black Hills, bathing the rolling landscape in golden light that glinted off the waters of Thunder Creek. Tall grasses swayed in waves across the valley, their vibrant green beginning to yield to the first whispers of autumn gold. Running Wolf stood silently, atop a weathered granite outcropping, his sharp eyes fixed on the distant eastern horizon. At 32 winters, he carried himself with the assured dignity of a man who had earned the respect of his people through both wisdom and courage. The Lakota called him Hokshila He Nunwang, a name bestowed after he'd tracked and killed a wolf that had been hunting their village horses during a harsh winter when he was just 16. His father had been the tribe's most respected medicine, and his mother a skilled horse trainer whose mounts were sought by warriors from many bands. Both had succumbed to the white man's coughing sickness brought by soldiers to their winter camp 3 years past, leaving Running Wolf to fulfill his promise to safeguard the ancestral lands they had loved so deeply. 4 nights ago, Chief Black Gettle had summoned Running Wolf to his lodge, where the tribal council had gathered in solemn assembly. The firelight had cast deep shadows across the chief's weathered face as he spoke words that still burned in Running Wolf's mind. The white man's government ignores our treaties. More wagons cross our hunting grounds each moon. They build cabins on land that was never theirs to claim. Their hunters kill our buffalo for nothing but tongues and hides, leaving the meat to rot. This desecration cannot continue. Grandmother Many Birds, the eldest council member, had added in a voice thin with age, but powerful with conviction. When they first appeared, we offered food and guidance. We taught them to survive these lands. Now they take without permission, destroy what they cannot use, bring disease to our children. The chief's directive had been unambiguous. You must make them understand these hills remain under Lakota protection. Any who trespass beyond the boundary creek must be turned away. Those who resist, the implication had hung in the lodge like smoke, needing no elaboration. Running Wolf had understood his duty clearly: protect the tribe's territory by whatever means necessary. For countless generations, the Lakota had shared the vast plains with other tribes. Their hunting grounds defined by natural landmarks and mutual understanding, rather than the arbitrary lines drawn on the white man's maps. But with each passing season, those understandings eroded, treaties were signed and broken, and the land available to his people shrank. The recent agreement had designated Thunder Creek as the eastern boundary of Lakota territory, a concession that had already cost them vital hunting grounds and access to sacred sites. Running Wolf adjusted the Winchester rifle slung across his back, a weapon acquired in trade from a desperate trapper last winter. The irony did not escape him, using the white man's tools to defend against white encroachment. But practical necessity outweighed principle. His people's survival was at stake. Movement on the eastern prairie caught his attention. A Small group of wagons slowly making their way toward Thunder Creek. Running Wolf counted 3 covered wagons traveling together in a tight formation. If they continued on their present course, they would reach the creek crossing by mid-afternoon, entering lands they had no right to claim. With a low whistle, he summoned his cousin Silent Fox, a young warrior of 19 who had been keeping watch in the brush below. The younger man climbed swiftly to join Running Wolf on the outcropping, his movements fluid and nearly soundless despite his eagerness. 3 wagons, Running Wolf informed him in Lakota. Small group, likely families. Silent Fox's expression darkened, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. They always begin this way. A few families, then more, then soldiers to protect them. Running Wolf studied the wagon's progress through narrowed eyes. Perhaps, or perhaps they have simply lost their way. Lost? Silent Fox scoffed. They choose not to see our boundaries. Chief Black Kettle was clear. No more trespassers. We will warn them first, Running Wolf replied evenly, as has always been our way. Silent Fox's fingers tightened around his knife handle. And if they refuse our warning? Running Wolf watched the wagon's steady approach toward the creek boundary. After a long moment, he answered, "Then we do what must be done to protect our people." They descended the rocky slope to where their horses waited in a sheltered grove of cottonwoods. Mounting swiftly, Running Wolf led them along a hidden trail that would intercept the wagons just before they reached the creek crossing. As they rode, he noted the signs of the settlers' growing impact. Fewer prairie chickens flushing from the grass, rabbit burrows abandoned, the absence of deer tracks that had once been abundant. By the time they reached the creek, the wagons had halted at the water's edge. From the cover of a dense thicket, Running Wolf observed the settlers, 2 men, 3 women, and 4 young children. No soldiers or heavily armed hunters, just families seeking new beginnings on land that did not belong to them. One man tested the creek's depth with a long branch, while another consulted what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. The women kept the children close, one pointing to a flock of birds wheeling overhead, turning the journey into a lesson for the young ones. Families. Running Wolf said quietly, something uncomfortable settling in his chest. Silent Fox tensed beside him. They will build cabins, others will follow, then trading posts, then forts. Wait here, Running Wolf instructed, dismounting and passing his rifle to his cousin. No weapons yet. The chief said, "I know what the chief said," Running Wolf cut him off with a stern glance. "But I will speak with them first." He approached on foot, moving deliberately into the open rather than using stealth. The settlers spotted him almost immediately. The man with the branch, straightening abruptly, his hand dropping to a holstered pistol. Running Wolf raised his empty hands, stopping at a distance that would not appear threatening. "This creek marks Lakota territory," he called in English, his accent slight from years of trading interactions. "You may not cross." The response was instant. Women gathering children behind them, men moving protectively forward. The older of the 2 men, grey-bearded and wary, stepped ahead of the others. "We have official passage papers," he announced loudly, reaching slowly into his coat. "Government authorization for settlement at Willow Creek Valley." Running Wolf remained expressionless. "Your government's papers have no meaning here. This is Lakota land." The younger man, perhaps the elder's son, moved forward with obvious agitation. "We've been traveling for nearly 3 months with approval from Fort Laramie. The route follows this creek crossing." "Then your fort gave you wrong directions," Running Wolf replied evenly. "The treaty establishes this creek as our boundary. Cross it, and you trespass on Lakota hunting grounds." A movement near the 3rd wagon caught Running Wolf's attention. Another woman emerged, slender and dressed in practical but finer clothing than the others. While the others displayed fear, she approached with measured steps, her posture revealing caution, but not terror. "Mr. Crawford," she addressed the younger man, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Perhaps we should consider what he's saying. The settler named Crawford turned to her with barely concealed impatience. Miss Elizabeth, we've come too far to change course now. Coleman's Ridge is barely 15 miles beyond this crossing. The woman, Elizabeth, studied Running Wolf with an intensity that made him acutely conscious of her assessment. Where the others saw only threat, her gaze suggested she was seeing something more complex. Is there an alternative crossing? She asked Running Wolf directly. A place where we might pass without violating your people's territory. Before he could respond to this unexpected question, Silent Fox emerged from the thicket on horseback, rifle clearly visible in his hands. The atmosphere shifted instantly, the men positioning themselves in front of their families, faces hardening, with fear and determination. "Running Wolf!" Silent Fox called in Lakota, though his eyes remained fixed on the settlers. "They test your patience. Remember the chief's words." The settlers couldn't understand the words, but the tone and silent. Fox's stance communicated clear threat. The women hurried the children toward the wagons, while the men stood their ground. "You have until sundown to turn your wagons north," Running Wolf announced, switching back to English. "Follow the creek 15 miles, and you will find Carson's trading post. From there, take the northern route to your settlement." "That's days." "Out of our way," Crawford protested. "We're almost out of supplies as it is." 3 days, or your lives," Silent Fox added coldly in halting English. Running Wolf shot his cousin a warning glance before addressing the settlers again. "The northern route is longer, but will not violate our territory. These are hunting grounds, not land for your farms or buildings." The woman named Elizabeth stepped forward despite Crawford's attempt to block her. "Our supplies are limited," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "We have children who need proper shelter before winter." Something in her composure, the lack of pleading or panic in her voice, gave Running Wolf pause. Unlike the others, she addressed him as an equal, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "Game is plentiful along the northern route," he found himself offering, "and the trading post will have provisions." A subtle shift crossed her features, not quite a smile, but perhaps acknowledgement of the concession. She nodded once, then turned to Crawford. "We should heed his advice," she said firmly. "I have no desire to risk the children's lives for the sake of a shorter journey." Crawford appeared ready to argue, but the older man placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Elizabeth is right, son. We've come too far to risk everything now." Running Wolf watched as silent communication passed between the settlers. Finally, Crawford nodded reluctantly. "We'll take the northern route," he announced, turning back to Running Wolf with poorly disguised resentment. "But you tell your people, we travel with the full protection of the United States government." Running Wolf didn't respond to the empty threat. Instead, his attention remained on Elizabeth, who was helping guide the children back to the wagons. There was something distinctive in her manner, a quiet authority that seemed incongruous with her position among the traveling party. "We will watch until you turn north," Running Wolf informed them, stepping back toward the thicket. "Anyone attempting to cross the creek will not receive another warning." As the settlers began preparing to move their wagons, Elizabeth approached. Running Wolf once more, stopping at a respectful distance. "My name is Elizabeth Crawford," she said. "I'm to be the teacher at Coleman's Ridge Settlement." Running Wolf wasn't sure why she felt compelled to share this information, but found himself responding. "I am called Running Wolf." A flicker of interest crossed her face at his name, but she simply nodded. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Running Wolf," she said. "Not everyone would have granted us that courtesy." Before he could respond, she returned to the wagons. As she climbed aboard the third wagon, separate from the others, Running Wolf noticed she carried herself with the composed dignity of someone accustomed to managing difficult circumstances. "They will try to cross elsewhere," Silent Fox predicted as they withdrew to their horses, or return with more men. Perhaps, Running Wolf acknowledged, unable to dismiss the possibility. We will alert the scouts to watch the creek for several miles in each direction. As the wagons began their slow turn northward along the creek bank, Running Wolf mounted his horse, his gaze lingering on the third wagon where Elizabeth Crawford sat. A schoolteacher journeying to a remote settlement seemed unusual, and something about her demeanor suggested a story more complex than was immediately apparent. "You think too much, cousin," Silent Fox observed bluntly. The chief's instructions were simple. Running Wolf turned his horse toward the outcropping they had descended earlier. "Nothing about our situation is simple anymore." They followed the settlers at a distance until sunset, ensuring the wagons maintained their northward course along Thunder Creek. When the convoy finally made camp well away from any crossing point, Running Wolf sent Silent Fox to inform the other scouts about the encounter, while he remained to keep watch through the night. From his position on a hillside overlooking their campsite, Running Wolf observed the settlers' evening routine. The Crawfords gathered around their fire, children kept close as darkness fell. But Elizabeth sat somewhat apart, occasionally engaging with the children, but mostly occupied with what appeared to be a book in her hands. As night deepened and most of the settlers retired to their wagons, she remained by the fire, her profile illuminated by the flickering flames. There was a stillness about her that struck Running Wolf as familiar, the composed solitude of one carrying grief. The realization made him uncomfortable. It was easier to fulfill his duty when the trespassers remained faceless, impersonal representatives of the encroaching threat to his people's existence. Harder when they revealed themselves as individuals, with their own stories and struggles. Running Wolf shifted his position, forcing his thoughts back to his purpose. The settlers had heeded the warning this time, but experience had taught him that the pressure of westward expansion would not relent. More would come with their papers and promises and plans to transform the sacred Black Hills into something unrecognizable. As the night grew colder, he wrapped his buffalo robe tighter around his shoulders, his eyes never leaving the settlers' camp. The woman, Elizabeth, finally retired to her wagon as the fire burned down to embers. Something about her continued to occupy his thoughts, a puzzle he couldn't quite resolve. "She is still the enemy," he reminded himself quietly in Lakota. "They all are." But as he settled in for his overnight vigil, Running Wolf couldn't quite convince himself of the simplicity of that truth anymore. 2 weeks after turning away the settlers at Thunder Creek, the first winter storm descended upon the Black Hills with unexpected fury. Wind howled across the plains like a vengeful spirit, driving snow in blinding sheets that transformed the landscape into a treacherous white wilderness. In the protected valley where the Lakota had established their winter camp, Running Wolf secured the entrance to his lodge against the biting cold. "The hunting party should have returned by now," Silent Fox observed, appearing beside him with a buffalo robe wrapped tightly around his shoulders. Running Wolf nodded, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They would have sought shelter. When the storm began, they know better than to travel in this. The early November blizzard had struck with minimal warning, catching even the most weather-wise elders by surprise. Grandmother Many Birds had been particularly troubled, claiming the spirits whispered of a difficult winter ahead. "I'll check our eastern boundary," Running Wolf decided. "The storm may have driven elk down from the higher ground." Silent Fox now frowned. "You shouldn't go alone. The white settlers will be huddled in their cabins, praying for survival," Running Wolf replied. "No one with sense would venture out in this weather." Nevertheless, he armed himself thoroughly before departing. The Winchester rifle, ammunition, his hunting knife, and a small axe. Tools for survival that doubled as protection if needed. The council's directive remained clear: defend the boundaries, Eliminate threats. In the 2 weeks since their encounter with Elizabeth Crawford's wagon party, 3 more groups of settlers had been turned away at different crossing points along Thunder Creek. The second group had offered resistance, requiring a show of force from Running Wolf scouts to persuade them to seek another route. The council was growing impatient with warnings and increasingly insistent on more definitive action. Only Chief Black Kettle's measured leadership had prevented bloodshed thus far, but even his influence had limits. The tribe's future balanced precariously between defending what remained of their territory and avoiding the devastating military reprisals that would surely follow any violence against white settlers. Running Wolf chose his most sturdy horse, a muscular buckskin gelding accustomed to winter conditions. With provisions for 3 days secured behind his saddle, he set out eastward, following Thunder Creek, which now lay frozen beneath the steadily accumulating snow. The storm diminished slightly by midday, but visibility remained poor. The familiar landscape transformed into unrecognizable drifts and valleys of white. Running Wolf had covered nearly 15 miles, finding no signs of either the hunting party or wildlife movement. The temperature continued to drop as daylight waned, and he began searching for suitable shelter to wait out the night. A cluster of boulders near a bend in the creek offered some protection from the wind. Running Wolf dismounted, leading his horse into the lee of the formation. As he gathered wood for a small fire, something unnatural caught his eye. A dark shape, half buried in a snowdrift, some 60 yards downstream. Moving cautiously closer, the shape resolved into the unmistakable outline of an overturned wagon, its canvas covering torn and flapping in the wind. Running Wolf approached with his rifle ready, scanning for any signs of life around the wreckage. The wagon had clearly been carried downstream by the creek before the water froze, now resting at an angle on the western bank. Lakota land. No. Horses were visible, suggesting they had either broken free or been taken by survivors. "Hello," he called, his voice immediately swallowed by the wind. "Anyone here?" Only silence answered. Running Wolf circled the wagon, noting the household goods scattered across the snow, a broken trunk, cooking utensils, books half buried in the drift. The scene suggested a recent disaster, perhaps within the past day. He was about to turn away when a faint sound reached him, not the wind, but something almost like a moan. Running Wolf stilled, listening intently until it came again, emanating from beneath the overturned wagon. Dropping to his knees, he peered into the shadowy space created where the wagon box had come to rest against a rocky outcrop. A figure huddled there, wrapped in blankets crusted with ice, barely distinguishable from the surrounding shadows. For a moment, Running Wolf considered retreating. A dying settler was not his concern, especially one who had clearly been attempting to cross into Lakota territory despite the warnings. But something compelled him forward. With cautious movements, he reached into the space, touching what he hoped was a shoulder. "Can you hear me?" he asked in English. The blankets shifted slightly, and a pale face emerged, blue-tinged lips parting in a whisper too faint to discern. Even through the dirt and frost, Running Wolf recognized her immediately. Elizabeth Crawford, the teacher, from the settler wagon train. Her eyes, glazed with cold and confusion, struggled to focus on his face. "You," she managed, before a racking cough overtook her. Indecision paralyzed Running Wolf momentarily. The council's directive was clear. Trespassers were to be turned back or eliminated. But this woman posed no threat in her current state, and leaving her to freeze violated principles more fundamental than tribal politics. "Don't speak," he instructed, already shrugging out of his buffalo robe. "Can you move?" She nodded weakly, and Running Wolf helped her from beneath the wreckage, wrapping his robe around her shivering form. Her skin was dangerously cold, her movements uncoordinated, advanced stages of exposure that would claim her life without immediate intervention. "Where are the others?" he asked, scanning the area for additional survivors. Carson's trading. Ghost, she whispered through chattering teeth. I was returning supplies for school. Her explanation fragmented as another bout of coughing seized her. Running Wolf made his decision quickly, knowing that questioning her further would waste precious time. He whistled for his horse, which approached cautiously through the deepening. Snow, I need to get you warm, he told her, supporting most of her weight as he led her toward the boulders where he'd planned to make camp. Can you stay awake? Elizabeth nodded, though her head lolled against his shoulder. Children waiting. The children are safe, Running Wolf assured her, though he had no way of knowing this. Focus on staying conscious. He worked efficiently, securing his horse in the shelter of the rocks, then clearing snow to create a space protected from the wind. The small supply of firewood he'd gathered earlier would be insufficient for the night, but he spotted deadfall along the frozen creek that could be harvested once the immediate crisis had passed. Running Wolf built a fire with practiced movements, positioning Elizabeth beside it while he erected a crude shelter using the oilcloth he carried as part of his provisions. Her condition alarmed him. Lips and fingers showing signs of frostbite, breathing shallow and irregular, consciousness fading despite his instructions to stay awake. Elizabeth, he said firmly, using her name to capture her attention. Look at me. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in their depths. How do you know my name? The creek crossing. 2 weeks ago, Running Wolf reminded her, removing her frozen boots to assess the damage to her feet. You were traveling to Coleman's Ridge to be their teacher. Recognition flickered across her features. Running Wolf, she murmured. The Lakota scout. He nodded, relieved that her memory remained intact despite her condition. Your feet are frostbitten, but not severely. I need to warm them gradually. As he worked, Running Wolf maintained a steady stream of questions, forcing Elizabeth to respond and remain conscious. He learned that she had indeed reached Coleman's Ridge settlement via the northern route he'd recommended. After establishing her school with the settlement's 9 children, she had traveled back to Carson's trading post for additional supplies, accompanied only by a young man from the settlement who served as her guide and protection. The storm came. So suddenly, she explained, her voice strengthening slightly as warmth from the fire penetrated her frozen limbs. The creek. It wasn't fully frozen. Peter thought we could cross, but the ice broke beneath the wagon. This Peter? Running Wolf asked, preparing a broth from his provisions. Where is he now? Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. He didn't surface. I tried to find him, but the current... Her voice broke. I managed to reach this side, but the wagon, everything was lost. Running Wolf handed her the cup of hot broth, guiding it to her lips when her trembling hands proved inadequate. The story was clear: an inexperienced guide, a dangerous crossing attempt, a tragic outcome, but it didn't explain why Elizabeth had been traveling with only a single companion. Most settlements would send a group for supplies, he observed, not a teacher and a boy. Something guarded entered her expression. Resources are limited. Everyone has responsibilities. The evasion was obvious, but Running Wolf didn't press. Whatever complexities existed at Coleman's Ridge weren't his immediate concern. Ensuring this woman's survival through the night took precedence. As darkness enveloped them completely, the storm redoubled its fury. Running Wolf ventured out only briefly to secure more firewood, unwilling to leave Elizabeth alone for long. When he returned, he found her examining a small leather-bound book she'd extracted from inside her clothing, apparently the only possession she'd managed to save from the creek. My husband's journal, she explained, catching his questioning. Glance. Robert kept detailed accounts of his medical practice. It's all I have left of him. The revelation of her widowhood aligned with something Running Wolf had sensed during their first encounter, that specific quality of contained grief he'd recognized in her solitary figure by the campfire. He died in the war. Running Wolf. asked, feeding new branches into their fire. Elizabeth nodded. At Antietam, 4 years ago now, though sometimes it feels like yesterday. She traced the journal's cover with reverent fingers. He was a doctor, not a soldier. We had plans to establish a practice together in Minnesota. After he died, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories. Running Wolf absorbed this information silently. The great conflict that had torn apart the white man's nation had barely touched the Lakota directly, though its aftermath had accelerated westward expansion as displaced families sought new beginnings. "So you came west, alone," he observed. "To teach other people's children. To start again," she corrected gently. "Though yes, the children are my purpose now." The simple dignity in her statement resonated with Running Wolf in unexpected ways. His own parents had instilled in him the belief that purpose transcended individual happiness, that one lived to serve something greater than oneself. For him, that purpose was protecting his people. For Elizabeth Crawford, it was nurturing the next generation. As the night deepened around their small shelter, Running Wolf maintained the fire while Elizabeth drifted in and out of consciousness. Her condition had stabilized, but she remained dangerously weak. When she shivered violently despite the fire's warmth, Running Wolf hesitated only briefly before moving to her side, sharing his body heat in the practical, impersonal manner of wilderness survival. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice blurred with exhaustion, "for not leaving me to die." The gratitude carried an implicit understanding of what his duty might have dictated under different circumstances. Running Wolf found himself uncomfortable with her awareness of the fragility of her situation. "Rest," he instructed, adjusting the buffalo robe to better cover them both. "We have difficult decisions to make when morning comes." Elizabeth's breathing eventually settled into the rhythm of sleep, but Running Wolf remained vigilant, listening to the storm's fury while contemplating the complications this unexpected encounter had created. By the strict interpretation of the Council's directive, he should never have intervened. A trespasser had entered Lakota territory. Nature had rendered judgment. His duty should have been clear. Yet he had acted without hesitation to save her, driven by principles that transcended tribal boundaries. Now he faced the consequences of that choice. What to do with Elizabeth Crawford when daylight came? He could escort her back to Carson's trading post, returning her to her own people, the safest option for all concerned. But the trading post was at least 2 days' journey in good weather, potentially longer in these conditions, and her weakened state made such travel dangerous. Alternatively, he could bring her to the Lakota winter camp. Grandmother Manybird's healing skills might be Elizabeth's best chance for recovery, but introducing a white woman into the heart of the community carried significant risks. The council would question his judgment, possibly view his actions as a betrayal of their directive. The third option, leaving her with sufficient supplies to fend for herself once her condition improved, struck him as both impractical and dishonorable. Having intervened once, he couldn't abandon her to an uncertain fate. As Elizabeth slept beside him, her presence an unexpected complication, Running Wolf confronted the realization that sometimes duty to one's people and duty to one's principles could lead down divergent paths. Morning arrived with eerie stillness, the storm having exhausted itself during the night. The landscape lay transformed beneath a pristine blanket of snow 3 feet deep in places, the rising sun creating a blinding brilliance that forced Running Wolf to shield his eyes as he emerged from their shelter. Elizabeth had survived the night, though fever now colored her cheeks and quickened her breathing. The transition from extreme cold to warmth often triggered such responses, Running Wolf knew from experience. Left untreated, such fevers could be as deadly as the cold itself. He prepared a tea from herbs carried in his provisions, willow bark and echinacea, and helped Elizabeth drink it despite her semi-conscious state. The storm has passed, he informed her as clarity briefly returned to her eyes. But you're developing a fever. You need proper care. Carson's trading post, she murmured, attempting to sit up before weakness forced her back down. Running Wolf shook his head. Too far in your condition. He paused, the decision solidifying as he spoke it aloud. I'm taking you to my people's winter camp. Our healer can help you. Alarm crossed Elizabeth's features. Your counsel, you said trespassers would be turned back. Or eliminated, Running Wolf finished. But you're not trespassing now. You're under my protection. The distinction might seem meaningless to the tribal elders, but it was significant to Running Wolf. By claiming Elizabeth as his responsibility, he was invoking ancient protocols that even the council would hesitate to override. It was a calculated risk, but one that honored both his duty to his people and the moral principles his parents had instilled in him. Why would you risk that? Elizabeth asked, her directness undiminished by her weakened state. Running Wolf considered the question carefully before answering, because sometimes survival depends on seeing beyond boundaries. Running Wolf dismantled their camp efficiently, securing Elizabeth on his horse before mounting behind her. Her slight frame felt alarmingly fragile against him, radiating fever heat that contrasted sharply with the bitter cold surrounding them. As they set out southward toward the Lakota winter camp, Running Wolf found himself acutely aware of the boundary he had just crossed, from enforcing borders to deliberately breaching them, from tribal protector to something more complicated. Elizabeth drifted between consciousness and delirious dreams as they traveled, occasionally murmuring about children waiting for lessons or calling for her lost husband. Running Wolf maintained a steady pace through the snow-laden landscape, grateful that the storm had passed, but conscious of his passengers' deteriorating condition. By midday, they crested a ridge that offered views of the valley, where smoke from the Lakota lodges rose in thin columns against the clear sky. Running Wolf paused, allowing Elizabeth a moment to comprehend their destination. Your people may not welcome me, she observed, lucidity briefly returning. Perhaps not, Running Wolf acknowledged, but Grandmother Manybirds will not turn away. Someone in need, regardless of their origins, and her voice carries weight with the council. As they descended toward the winter camp, Running Wolf felt the weight of what he had set in motion. By bringing Elizabeth Crawford into the heart of Lakota territory, he was challenging the very directives he had sworn to uphold. Yet something deeper than tribal politics guided him now, a recognition that sometimes protection required opening boundaries rather than enforcing them. The first scout spotted them when they were still half a mile from the camp. Word spread quickly, and by the time Running Wolf reached the outer circle of lodges, a crowd had gathered. Silent Fox pushed to the front, his expression transitioning from relief to shock as he recognized Running Wolf's passenger. "Cousin," he hissed in Lakota, "have you lost your mind? You bring a white woman into our camp?" "She needs grandmother's medicine," Running Wolf replied calmly, though in English so Elizabeth could understand. "She nearly died in the storm," Silent Fox switched to English, his voice hardening. "Then she would have been one less trespasser to worry about." Elizabeth stirred against Running Wolf, attempting to sit straighter despite her weakness. "I understand your anger," she addressed Silent Fox directly, her voice faint but steady. "But I did not choose to cross your boundary. The creek decided that for me." Before Silent Fox could respond, the crowd parted to admit Grandmother Manybirds. The elderly healer approached, her face impassive as she studied the scene before her. "Running Wolf brings a wounded bird to our nest," she observed in Lakota, then switched to accented but clear English. "Why do you bring her here, Running Wolf?" Running Wolf met the old woman's penetrating gaze without flinching. "Because she needs healing that only you can provide, Grandmother." and because I believe the spirits guided our paths to cross for a purpose beyond our understanding." The old woman's eyes narrowed, shifting to Elizabeth's fever-bright face. After a long moment of assessment, she nodded once. "Bring her to my lodge," she instructed. "The council will have many questions, but those can wait until her fever breaks, or until she dies." She fixed Running Wolf with a significant look. "Her life now rests in your hands. Whatever comes of this decision, you alone will bear it." As Running Wolf dismounted and carefully lifted Elizabeth from the horse, he felt the weight of the grandmother's words settle across his shoulders. In saving one life, he had potentially placed many others, including his own, in jeopardy. Yet, as he carried Elizabeth toward Grandmother Manybird's lodge, Running Wolf found himself strangely at peace with his choice. Whatever consequences awaited, he had acted according to principles that defined him more fundamentally than tribal politics ever could. Grandmother Manybird's lodge stood slightly apart from the others in the winter camp, its exterior marked by bundles of dried herbs and medicine pouches that identified it as a place of healing. Inside, the air hung heavy with aromatic smoke from a mixture of sage, sweetgrass, and other medicinal plants that Running Wolf couldn't identify. Elizabeth lay on a bed of furs near the central fire, her fever having intensified during the journey to the camp. "She burns from inside," Grandmother Manybird's observed, placing a weathered hand on Elizabeth's forehead. "The cold entered her bones and now fights to leave." Running Wolf stood at the lodge entrance, uncertain of his place in this women's domain of healing. "Will she survive?" The old woman shot him a sharp glance. "That depends on her strength and the spirit's will." She gestured to a young woman who had been assisting her. "Bring cool water from the stream and more willow bark." As the assistant departed, Grandmother turned her full attention to Running Wolf. "Chief Black Kettle has called the council. They await you now." Running Wolf had expected this summons, though perhaps not quite so quickly. The council's reaction to his decision was predictable. Bringing a white woman into their winter camp violated both their explicit directives and generations of caution regarding outsiders. "Will you?" he began, glancing at Elizabeth's feverish form. "I will tend to her," Grandmother assured him, her tone softening slightly. "But you must face what you have set in motion, Running Wolf." The council lodge stood at the center of the winter camp, its entrance facing east according to tradition. Running Wolf approached with measured steps, conscious of the eyes following his progress. Word had spread quickly. The respected warrior, who had been tasked with keeping trespassers out, had instead brought one into their midst. Inside the council lodge, 7 elders sat in a semicircle around the central fire pit, their faces grave. In the flickering light, Chief Black Kettle occupied the central position, his silver-streaked hair and deeply lined face reflecting decades of leadership through increasingly difficult times. Running Wolf took his place opposite the elders, assuming the cross-legged position of respect. "Running Wolf," the chief began formally, using his Lakota name, "you have brought a white woman into our winter camp against our directive that all trespassers be turned away from our territory." It wasn't phrased as a question, but Running Wolf recognized the invitation to explain himself. "The woman did not intentionally trespass," he stated, maintaining the formal tone appropriate for council proceedings. "Her wagon broke through ice during the storm. The creek carried her onto our land. Her companion drowned." An elder to the chief's right, Grey Eagle, a warrior from an earlier generation, spoke sharply. "Intention matters little. Results remain the same. One settler becomes many." Running Wolf met the elder's fierce gaze steadily. "She was dying. To leave her would violate our teaching that all life deserves respect. The lives of our people deserve respect first," countered another elder. "Each settler we allow threatens our future." Chief Black Kettle raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Tell us, Running Wolf, who is this woman you risk so much to save?" Running Wolf chose his words carefully. "Her name is Elizabeth Crawford. She's a teacher traveling to Coleman's Ridge settlement. She's a widow whose husband died in the white man's civil war." Something flickered in the chief's expression. Recognition, perhaps, of parallels to losses their own people had suffered. "A teacher," he repeated thoughtfully. "And what do you propose we do with this teacher now that you have brought her among us?" "Once Grandmother Manybirds has healed her fever, I will escort her to Carson's trading post," Running Wolf replied. 2 days' journey when weather permits." The council exchanged glances, clearly communicating without words. Finally, Chief Black Kettle spoke again, his voice weighted with authority. "The winter has only begun, Running Wolf. The path to Carson's trading post may remain impossible for weeks, perhaps months." He leaned forward slightly. "Until then, this woman remains your responsibility. If she brings harm to our people through action or simply presence that draws others, that harm will be counted against you." Running Wolf inclined his head, accepting the burden. "I understand, Chief." "Furthermore," Standing Bear continued, "she must not be permitted to observe our sacred ceremonies or learn that which is meant only for Lakota ears. She remains an outsider, regardless of how she came to be here. She will respect our ways," Running Wolf promised. The chief studied him for a long moment before concluding, "The council will watch closely, Running Wolf. The path you walk narrows. With this choice." As Running Wolf departed the council lodge, the weight of responsibility settled more firmly across his shoulders. He had known the potential consequences of bringing Elizabeth into the camp, yet the reality of his position, caught between duty to tribal directives and commitment to the woman whose life he had saved, crystallized with new clarity. When he returned to Grandmother Manybird's lodge, he found Elizabeth awake, though obviously weak. She sat propped against rolled furs, sipping a steaming liquid from a carved wooden cup. Her eyes, clearer now but still reflecting fever brightness, found his immediately. "Your council wants me gone," she observed, her perception cutting straight. The truth, despite her weakened state, Running Wolf settled cross-legged near her bedside. "When you are strong enough. And until then, you are under my protection," he replied simply. Elizabeth studied him over the rim of her cup. "At what cost to yourself?" The directness of her question, her immediate grasp of the political complexities his decision had created, surprised him. Most white settlers Running Wolf had encountered viewed tribal structure as primitive, failing to recognize the sophisticated governance and social contracts that bound Lakota society. "The cost is mine to bear," he answered. Grandmother Manybirds, who had been mixing herbs at the far side of the lodge, snorted softly. "Men always think they alone carry burdens." She approached, examining Elizabeth's eyes and feeling her forehead with practiced movements. "Fever burns less hot now. Good sign." "Thank you for your care," Elizabeth said, addressing the old woman directly. "I understand what risk my presence creates." The grandmother's weathered face remained impassive, but something in her eyes softened marginally. "Running Wolf says the creek brought you to us. Perhaps there is purpose in this crossing of paths." Her words echoed Running Wolf's earlier statement, suggesting layers of meaning he hadn't fully considered. Before he could reflect further, voices outside announced visitors. Silent Fox entered, accompanied by 2 young women carrying food, a gesture of hospitality that surprised Running Wolf, given his cousin's earlier hostility. "The council says she stays until weather permits travel," Silent Fox stated in Lakota, his tone conveying clear disapproval despite the hospitality offering. Chief Black Kettle instructed that she must be fed and sheltered properly. The young women placed wooden bowls of stew and fresh bread near Elizabeth's bedside, their curious glances darting between the white woman and Running Wolf before they retreated from the lodge. Silent Fox lingered, switching to English as he addressed Elizabeth directly. "Many here lost family to white soldiers and settlers. Remember that when you walk among us." Elizabeth met his challenging gaze with quiet dignity. "Many white families lost loved ones in the same conflicts, Mr. Fox. Grief isn't exclusive to either side." Silent Fox appeared momentarily taken aback, both by her use of his name and the evenness of her response. He glanced at Running Wolf with an expression that mingled frustration and reluctant respect before departing without further comment. "Your young relative doesn't approve of me," Elizabeth observed once he'd gone. "Silent Fox lost his parents in conflicts with white settlers," Running Wolf explained, offering her a bowl of the stew. "His caution has reason behind it." Elizabeth accepted the food with murmured thanks. "As does yours, I imagine. Yet here I am in your winter camp rather than frozen by the creek." The implied question hung between them. Why had he chosen to save her when his assigned duty suggested otherwise? Running Wolf found himself unwilling to explore his motivations too deeply, even in his own thoughts. "Eat," he advised instead. "Regain your strength. We will speak more tomorrow." The following days established a fragile routine. Elizabeth's fever broke on the third night, though weakness kept her largely confined to Grandmother Manybird's lodge. Running Wolf divided his time between his regular duties, hunting, council meetings and perimeter security, and sitting with Elizabeth, initially to ensure her compliance with tribal restrictions, but increasingly drawn to their conversations. On the fifth day, when Elizabeth proved strong enough to walk short distances, Running Wolf guided her through the winter camp. The reaction among his people varied widely. Elders watched with guarded expressions. Young warriors maintained deliberate distance, while children exhibited undisguised curiosity about the pale-skinned woman with unfamiliar clothing and speech. "They stare because they've never seen a white woman up close," Running Wolf explained, as they walked slowly past a group of young girls who giggled and whispered among themselves. "Or perhaps because I'm walking with the warrior assigned to eliminate trespassers," Elizabeth suggested with surprising humor. Running Wolf found himself smiling despite the uncomfortable truth in her observation. That too. They paused near the edge of the camp, where Elizabeth could rest on a fallen log, while observing the daily activities of Lakota life. Women scraping hides, men repairing tools, elders teaching young ones through stories and demonstrations. Elizabeth's smile in response carried a warmth that defied the winter chill surrounding them. In that moment, Running Wolf recognized with startling clarity that the boundaries being transcended extended far beyond territorial lines or cultural traditions. Against all expectation, against tribal directive and personal caution, he was forming an attachment to this widowed teacher that could reshape his understanding of duty and destiny alike. January arrived with bitter vengeance, bringing temperatures so severe that the Lakota elders spoke of omens. Breath crystallized instantly in the air outside the lodges, and even the hardiest wildlife retreated into deeper shelters. The winter camp had settled into a rhythm shaped by necessity and tradition. Daily hunting rotations, communal meals, prepared from preserved stores, evening gatherings for stories and instruction. Elizabeth Crawford had been among them for nearly 6 weeks now, her presence evolving from anomaly to acknowledged, if unusual, fixture. The children greeted her enthusiastically each morning as she made her way to the teaching lodge, where she conducted daily lessons in English, arithmetic, and what she called the wider world beyond the plains. Always under the watchful eye of either Grandmother Manybirds or Greyhawk, her teaching respected the boundaries established by the council, while gently expanding the children's understanding. Running Wolf watched this transformation with complex emotions. His responsibility for Elizabeth remained official and acknowledged, but what had begun as duty had evolved into something neither had anticipated. Their evenings spent in conversation, first about practical matters of survival and adaptation, had gradually deepened into exchanges about beliefs, hopes, and the uncertain future facing both their peoples. "You're distracted," Silent Fox observed as they checked snare lines along a frozen creek bed. "The white teacher occupies too many of your thoughts." Running Wolf adjusted a snare that had been disturbed by wind. "The council tasked me with her." "Supervision." "Supervision," Silent Fox repeated with obvious skepticism. "Is that what you call the hours spent talking by grandmother's fire? The smiles you exchanged during children's lessons? Rather than denying observations that held undeniable truth, Running Wolf changed the subject. "These tracks are fresh. Rabbit moving eastward." Silent Fox wasn't deterred. "The council grows concerned, cousin. Chief Black Kettle has defended your decisions thus far, but questions arise about your judgment. The warning was delivered without malice, concern from family rather than criticism from rival." Running Wolf straightened, meeting his cousin's gaze directly. "My judgment serves the people as it always has," he stated firmly. "Elizabeth Crawford's presence has brought no harm. The children benefit from her knowledge." "Knowledge carries dangers of its own," Silent Fox countered. "She teaches our children white ways of thinking, white words, white numbers." "Tools," Running Wolf corrected. "Tools they may need as the world changes around us." Silent Fox fell silent as they continued checking the remaining snares, 2 yielding rabbits that would contribute to the evening meal. As they prepared to return to camp, he spoke again, his voice lower. "There's more you should know. Scouts reported movement to the east, soldiers from Fort Laramie traveling with several civilian men." Running Wolf's attention sharpened instantly. "How many? What direction?" 10 soldiers, 4 civilians," Silent Fox replied. "Following Thunder Creek. They stopped at Carson's trading post 4 days ago, asking questions about a missing teacher." The information landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication expanding outward. Nearly 2 months had passed since Elizabeth's accident at the creek. Running Wolf had assumed her absence would be noted at the settlement. But military involvement suggested higher concerns. "The traders at the junction gave them nothing," Silent Fox shrugged. "They claimed ignorance, according to our scouts. But snow has melted enough along the creek valley to reveal what was hidden. The soldiers found remains of a wagon. They search. More purposefully now, Running Wolf absorbed this news in silence as they walked. The winter had been harsh but inconsistent, heavy snow followed by brief warming periods, then freezing again. Such patterns created unpredictable traveling conditions and exposed evidence previously concealed by drifts. "I must inform the council," he decided, "and Elizabeth should know that search parties look for her." Silent Fox gave him a sidelong glance, "And if she wishes to rejoin her people, the soldiers could escort her safely to her settlement." The question probed at tensions Running Wolf had deliberately avoided examining too closely. His official responsibility was clear. Once safe passage became possible, Elizabeth should return to her own people. Yet the prospect now filled him with unexpected reluctance. "That will be her choice to make," he replied carefully, "when all facts are known." When they returned to camp, Running Wolf sought out Chief Black Kettle immediately, finding him in conversation with several elders outside the council lodge. After hearing Silent Fox's report, the chief's weathered face grew graver. "This changes matters," he said quietly. "Soldiers searching for a missing white woman will not respect boundaries. If they believe we hold her against her will..." The implication hung in the air between them. Military incursions into Lakota territory carried potentially devastating consequences, not just for their winter camp, but for the fragile peace maintained throughout the region. "I will speak with her," Running Wolf offered. Learn what she wishes to do. Chief Black Kettle studied him thoughtfully. Your counsel has value, Running Wolf, but in this matter, your judgment may be clouded. The teacher has become more than a responsibility to you. The observation, delivered without accusation, still carried the force of truth. Running Wolf could not honestly deny it. My duty to our people remains paramount, he insisted. See that it does, the chief advised. Bring the teacher to the council lodge at sundown. We will hear her words directly. Running Wolf found Elizabeth in the teaching lodge, working with a small group of older children on creating a map. Using a mixture of clay, sand, and sticks, they had constructed a remarkably accurate representation of the surrounding territory, rivers, hills, and forests, all depicted with careful attention to scale and relationship. Running Wolf, she greeted him with a smile that quickly faded as she registered his expression. What's happened? He gestured toward the door. We need to speak privately. After instructing the children to continue their work, Elizabeth followed him outside. Despite the intense cold, the winter sun provided enough warmth for brief conversation in the open air, away from curious ears. Soldiers from Fort Laramie search for you, Running Wolf informed her without preamble. They found the remains of your wagon at the creek crossing. Elizabeth absorbed this news with visible surprise. After all this time, I assumed Coleman's Ridge had sent word of my disappearance months ago. Apparently they've been searching since before the heaviest snows, Running Wolf explained. The chief wishes you to appear before the council this evening. Understanding dawned in her eyes. They fear military conflict if I'm found here. Her perception of the political implications impressed, but didn't surprise him. During her weeks in the camp, Elizabeth had demonstrated remarkable insight into Lakota governance and concerns. Such conflict would benefit neither your people nor mine, Running Wolf acknowledged. But there are complications. Elizabeth's gaze held his steadily. Such as whether I wished to return. The directness of her statement caught him momentarily off guard. They had never explicitly discussed long-term possibilities, focusing instead on the immediate realities of her situation. The council will ask your intentions, he confirmed. Once the soldiers locate you, decisions must be made quickly. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I need time to consider. This isn't a simple matter of returning to my previous life. After a brief pause, she added, Will you walk with me before the council meets? I'd like to organize my thoughts. Despite the cold, they walked along the perimeter of the camp, Elizabeth wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that Grandmother Many Birds had gifted her. The simple garment symbolized her peculiar status, neither fully accepted among the Lakota, nor entirely separate from them. I came west seeking purpose after Robert died, she said, after they had walked in silence for several minutes. Teaching at Coleman's Ridge seemed the answer. But from the beginning something felt incomplete. The settlement wanted their children educated just enough to manage ledgers and read simple contracts, not to truly understand the world. Running Wolf listened without interrupting, sensing she needed to articulate thoughts long held private. Then the creek incident happened, she continued, and I found myself in a community that values knowledge differently. Your people teach children to observe, to question, to connect ideas rather than simply memorize them. Elizabeth paused, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I've learned as much as I've taught these past weeks. My people would say the greatest learning comes when we recognize how much we don't know, Running Wolf offered. A smile touched her lips. Your grandmother told me something similar when I first began teaching here. She said, empty cups can be filled, but cups already full have no room for new waters. They had reached the eastern edge of the camp, where the land sloped gently toward the valley below. In the distance, the frozen Thunder Creek wound through the landscape like a silver ribbon. If you choose to return with the soldiers, Running Wolf said carefully, arrangements could be made quickly. Chief Black Kettle would ensure safe passage to meet them. Elizabeth turned to face him directly. And if I choose not to return? The question hung between them, laden with implications beyond the immediate political concerns. Running Wolf met her gaze steadily. That path carries greater complications. The soldiers will not simply accept your disappearance. They may believe you're held against your will. Could I not simply send a message, explain my choice? Would your people accept such a message as genuine? Running Wolf countered gently. Or would they assume coercion? Elizabeth sighed, acknowledging the truth in his question. You're right, of course. They would never believe a white teacher would choose to remain among the Lakota willingly. She fell silent for several moments before asking, What would you advise, Running Wolf? Not as the warrior assigned to watch me, but as the man I've come to know these past weeks. The distinction mattered, perhaps more than anything else in their complex situation. Running Wolf considered his response carefully, aware of competing loyalties pulling at his conscience. I would advise you to follow the path that brings the greatest peace to your spirit, he finally said, but to recognize that all choices carry consequences beyond ourselves. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they made their way back through the camp toward the council lodge. Running Wolf noticed how many of his people acknowledged Elizabeth as they passed. Nods from women, children calling, greetings, even grudging recognition from warriors who had initially viewed her with suspicion. In less than 2 months, she had created connections that defied expectations. The council lodge was already filled when they arrived. Elders seated in their traditional positions with Chief Black Kettle at the center. Additional tribal members stood along the walls, their presence indicating the significance of the gathering. Silent Fox stood among a group of younger warriors, his expression carefully neutral as Running Wolf and Elizabeth entered. Elizabeth, Crawford, Chief Black Kettle began once they were seated. News has reached us that soldiers search for you along Thunder Creek. They have found your wagon. Elizabeth inclined her head respectfully. Chief Black Kettle, I understand this creates danger for your people. I wish to help however I can. The chief studied her thoughtfully. When Running Wolf brought you to our camp, we offered healing, according to our ways. Now you have lived among us through half a winter. The council wishes to know your intentions now that your people search for you. All eyes in the lodge focused on Elizabeth as she formulated her response. Running Wolf watched her gather herself with the same quiet dignity she had displayed since their first encounter at the creek boundary. My time among the Lakota has taught me much, Elizabeth began, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye upon her. Your generosity saved my life. Your wisdom expanded my understanding. Your children have shown me new ways of teaching and learning. She paused, glancing briefly at Running Wolf before continuing. If circumstances were different, I would ask permission to remain longer to continue the work we've begun together. Murmurs rippled through the lodge at this unprecedented statement. Even Running Wolf, who had suspected her attachment to the community, was surprised by the directness of her declaration. But Elizabeth continued, silencing the whispers. I understand that my presence now threatens the safety of this camp. If soldiers believe you hold me against my will, conflict becomes inevitable. Chief Black Kettle nodded slowly. You show wisdom in recognizing this truth. What do you propose? I will return to my people, Elizabeth stated firmly, but I wish to do so in a way that protects yours. If I approach the soldiers alone, explaining that I survived the creek accident and was cared for by sympathetic travelers, not specifically identifying the Lakota, perhaps further intrusion into your territory can be prevented. The strategy demonstrated careful consideration of both political realities and practical concerns. Several elders nodded approval while others conferred in low voices. "And after?" Grandmother Manybirds asked suddenly, her piercing gaze fixed on Elizabeth. "When you return to the white settlement, will you speak of what you've seen here, of our ways and beliefs?" The question cut to the heart of tribal concerns about Elizabeth's presence, not just the immediate danger of soldiers, but the longer-term implications of a white teacher carrying knowledge of Lakota customs back to settler communities. "Ye will honor the boundaries you've established," Elizabeth promised. "What I've learned here was shared with trust. I won't betray that trust." Chief Black Kettle considered her words before turning to Running Wolf. "Running Wolf, you brought this woman to our camp. You have observed her character these many weeks. Do you believe her word can be trusted in this matter?" The question placed Running Wolf in a position of both responsibility and influence. His assessment would significantly impact the council's decision. "Elizabeth Crawford has demonstrated honesty and respect since the day I found her by the creek," he stated with conviction. "She has honored every boundary set by this council, even when disagreeing with its necessity. I believe her words are trustworthy." The chief nodded, then addressed the wider council. "We will discuss this matter among ourselves. Running Wolf will escort Elizabeth Crawford outside while we deliberate." In the crisp evening air outside the council lodge, Elizabeth and Running Wolf stood in silence for several moments. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, countless points of light spanning the heavens. "Thank you," Elizabeth said, "finally, for supporting my word to the council." Running Wolf gazed upward at the emerging constellations. "I spoke the truth as I saw it. I meant what I said in there," she continued, her voice lower. "If circumstances were different, I would ask to stay longer." The unspoken question lingered between them. What different circumstances might look like? What future might be possible in a world less divided by boundaries and conflicts? Running Wolf found himself contemplating possibilities he had never previously allowed himself to consider. Before he could formulate a response, Silent Fox emerged from the council lodge. "The elders have reached a decision," he announced formally. "You are both called to hear their judgment." Inside, Chief Black Kettle delivered the council's determination with solemn authority. "Elizabeth Crawford will return to her people as she has offered," he declared. "Running Wolf will escort her to neutral ground, where soldiers can find her without entering Lakota territory. She will tell them she survived the creek accident and was aided by travelers heading northwest, not identifying our camp or people directly." The strategy was sound, maintaining necessary distance between the Lakota winter camp and the military search party while explaining Elizabeth's survival in plausible terms. "When will we depart?" Running Wolf asked. "Tomorrow at first light," the chief replied. "Our scouts report the soldiers make camp 15 miles downriver. You must reach suitable meeting ground by midday." As the council disbanded, reality settled over both Running Wolf and Elizabeth. Their unexpected time together had reached its conclusion, dictated by circumstances beyond their control. The political necessities of both their peoples required separation, just as deeper understanding had begun to blossom between them. Returning to Grandmother Manybird's lodge to help Elizabeth prepare for departure, Running Wolf found himself struggling with conflicting emotions. His duty to the Lakota people remained paramount. Ensuring Elizabeth's return to the soldiers without compromising tribal safety was necessary and right. Yet something profound had shifted within him during these weeks of unexpected connection. Elizabeth seemed equally subdued as she gathered her few possessions: the journal that had survived the creek crossing, small gifts from the children she'd taught, the clothing provided by the Lakota women. "Will you return to Coleman's Ridge?" Running Wolf asked as she carefully wrapped her husband's journal in a protective cloth. She considered the question thoughtfully. "I should. They need a teacher, and I made a commitment." After a pause, she added, "But I'm not the same teacher who left there in December. My understanding of education, of purpose, has changed." "Because of your time here?" Elizabeth nodded, her gaze meeting his directly. "Because of the Lakota children who showed me different ways of learning, because of Grandmother Manybird's wisdom, because—" She hesitated briefly. "Because of conversations beside evening fires that challenged everything I thought I knew." The tacit acknowledgement of the connection between them, intellectual, spiritual, and increasingly personal, hung in the air like smoke from the central fire. Neither moved to dispel it or diminish its significance. "The world beyond this camp remains unchanged," Running Wolf reminded her gently. "The boundaries between our peoples still exist." "Boundaries exist to be understood," Elizabeth countered, "not merely accepted without question. Isn't that what you've shown me these past weeks?" Before he could respond, Grandmother Manybirds entered the lodge, her timing seemingly deliberate. The old woman carried a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "For your journey," she told Elizabeth, placing the package in her hands. "Medicines for strength and clarity. You may need both in days ahead." Elizabeth accepted the gift with visible emotion. "Thank you for all you've taught me, Grandmother." The old woman's weathered face softened momentarily. "Teaching flows both ways. Like river currents, you brought different waters to our circle." Her piercing gaze shifted to Running Wolf. "Sometimes the spirits send exactly what is needed, though we may not recognize it at first." With that cryptic observation, Grandmother Manybirds departed, leaving Running Wolf and Elizabeth in charged silence. The imminent separation loomed between them, alongside questions neither had fully articulated about what had grown during their shared winter days. "Dawn comes early," Running Wolf finally said, practical concerns asserting themselves. "You should rest while you can. The journey tomorrow will be challenging." Elizabeth nodded, though her expression suggested sleep would prove elusive. "Running Wolf," she began, then hesitated. "I want you to know—" A commotion outside interrupted her words. Voices raised in alarm, running footsteps, the distinctive sound of warriors being summoned. Running Wolf moved instantly to the lodge entrance, Elizabeth close behind him. Outside, the camp had erupted into urgent activity. Silent Fox sprinted toward them, his face tense with fresh concern. "Scouts report riders approaching from the south," he announced breathlessly. "Not soldiers, settlers from Coleman's Ridge, heavily armed. They've tracked recent hunting parties back toward our camp. The implications were immediate and severe. Unlike military units constrained by official protocols, civilian settlers often operated according to their own judgment and prejudices. If they discovered the Lakota winter camp and Elizabeth's presence within it, the potential for violence multiplied exponentially." "How many?" Running Wolf demanded. "At least 12 men," Silent Fox replied grimly. "They travel with purpose, ignoring the cold. They could reach our valley by morning light." Elizabeth had gone pale beside them. "From Coleman's Ridge? Why would they search for you," Silent Fox stated flatly. "But they come prepared. For conflict, not rescue." Chief Black Kettle approached, his expression grave in the torchlight. "The council reconvenes immediately," he announced. "Our situation has changed. Both threats must now be addressed." As they followed the chief toward the council lodge, Running Wolf exchanged a weighted glance with Elizabeth. The carefully constructed plan for her departure had just collided with a new reality. Armed settlers approaching from one direction, military searchers from another, with the Lakota winter camp caught between these converging forces. The boundary between their worlds had just become a potential battlefield. The council lodge hummed with urgent voices as tribal leaders debated their options. Scouts had brought detailed reports that painted an increasingly alarming picture. 12 armed men from Coleman's Ridge, approaching from the south, following tracks that would lead directly to the winter camp by morning. Meanwhile, the military search party remained camped 15 miles downriver to the east, apparently unaware of the settler group's independent mission. "This is no rescue party," insisted Grey Eagle, his weathered face tight with anger. "Settlers do not travel armed with rifles and pistols to save one missing woman." "They may fear Lakota resistance," another elder suggested. "After the conflicts of recent years, they expect hostility." Chief Black Kettle raised a hand, silencing the competing voices. "What matters now is not their expectations, but our response. We face threats from two directions." Running Wolf stood near Elizabeth at the edge of the council circle, acutely aware of how her presence had become the focal point of dangers converging on his people. Yet looking at her stricken expression, he couldn't bring himself to blame her for circumstances she had neither created nor controlled. "May I speak?" Elizabeth asked, her voice steady despite the tension surrounding them. The chief studied her for a long moment before nodding. "We will hear your words." Elizabeth stepped forward respectfully. "I believe I understand why men from Coleman's Ridge would mount such a response. When I left for Carson's trading post in December, there was already conflict brewing with another settlement 20 miles south. Disputes over water access had led to threats. This new information shifted the context significantly. Running Wolf exchanged glances with Silent Fox, both recognizing its implications. "They believe we've taken sides in their white man's quarrel," Silent Fox concluded. Elizabeth nodded gravely. "If they think I've been captured or killed, they might view it as provocation, especially if they're already primed for conflict with neighboring settlers." Chief Black Kettle absorbed this insight before addressing Running Wolf directly. "Running Wolf, you know these lands better than any scout. Is there a path to reach the military search party before the settlers find our camp?" Running Wolf considered the terrain, weather conditions, and timing. "If we leave immediately, traveling through the night, we could reach the soldiers by early morning, but we'd need to cross open ground in darkness." "Dangerous with the ice and hidden ravines," Grey Eagle observed. "More dangerous to wait for. Armed settlers to find our families," countered another elder. The chief made his decision swiftly. "Running Wolf will escort Elizabeth Crawford to the military search party immediately. Explain what you must to ensure they intercept the settlers before conflict erupts." He turned to Silent Fox. "Select 4 warriors to accompany them. Our fastest, riders who know the eastern terrain." Silent Fox nodded, already moving to fulfill the order. "The rest of our people will prepare for possible attack," the chief continued. "Hidden shelters in the western hills. The elderly, children, and those who cannot fight will depart within the hour, led by Grey Hawk." The lodge emptied quickly as tribal members rushed to execute their assigned tasks. Running Wolf led Elizabeth outside, where the camp had transformed into orchestrated urgency. Women packing essential provisions, warriors checking weapons, elderly helping children bundle into warm clothing. "This is happening because of me," Elizabeth said quietly, watching a mother hurriedly wrapping her infant in furs. "No," Running Wolf corrected firmly. "This happens because men make assumptions and act on fear rather than knowledge. Your presence here may be the catalyst, but the underlying tensions existed long before you crossed the creek." They moved quickly toward Grandmother Manybird's lodge to collect what Elizabeth would need for the journey. Inside, the old woman was already packing a small bundle of provisions. "Take this," she instructed, handing Elizabeth a necklace of polished stones and carved wooden symbols. "Medicine for protection during dark travels." Elizabeth accepted it with visible emotion. "I never meant to bring danger to your people." The grandmother's piercing gaze softened momentarily. "Paths cross for reasons beyond our understanding. What matters is how we walk them once joined." She turned to Running Wolf, switching to Lakota. Guard her well, Running Wolf. She carries more importance than either of you yet realize. Before Running Wolf could question this cryptic statement, Silent Fox appeared at the entrance, accompanied by 4 warriors, all young men known for their riding skills and cool judgment under pressure. "Horses are ready," Silent Fox announced. "We've prepared the southern trail first to mislead any scouts watching the camp. You'll circle east once beyond the ridge." Running Wolf clasped his cousin's arm in wordless gratitude for his efficiency. Despite their occasional disagreements, Silent Fox's loyalty to both family and tribe remained unquestionable. "May your path be clear and your return swift, Silent," Fox said formally, then added in a lower voice, "Take no unnecessary risks for the white teacher's sake. Our people come first, always. Our people come first," Running Wolf assured him, though he felt the growing complexity of loyalties pulling at his conscience. Elizabeth emerged from the lodge dressed for harsh winter travel in a combination of her original clothing and Lakota-made garments. The fur-lined moccasins, leather leggings beneath her skirt, and buffalo robe would provide critical protection against the brutal cold of night riding. As they mounted the waiting horses, "Grandmother," many birds approached one last time, pressing something into Elizabeth's hand. "For when truth must be proven," she said enigmatically. Elizabeth glanced down at a small leather pouch, then carefully secured it inside her clothing beside her husband's journal. With final nods to the gathered tribal members, their small party set out, riding south along a well-used trail that would be easily spotted by anyone watching the camp. Once beyond sight of the valley, Running Wolf signaled a change in direction. They veered sharply east, cutting across virgin snow toward a less obvious route that would eventually lead them to the military encampment. The full moon provided enough illumination to navigate, though shadows created treacherous illusions across the snow-covered landscape. "We maintain silence until we reach the river crossing," Running Wolf instructed the group in Lakota, then translated for Elizabeth's benefit. "Sound carries far on cold nights." She nodded, understanding, her face partially hidden by the fur hood of her cloak. They rode in tense silence for nearly 2 hours, the only sounds being the horses' labored breathing and the crunch of snow beneath hooves. Elizabeth kept pace admirably, showing none of the complaints or weakness Running Wolf had sometimes observed in white women unaccustomed to physical hardship. When they reached a narrow point of the frozen Thunder Creek, Running Wolf called a brief halt. While the warriors checked the ice thickness to ensure safe crossing, he took the opportunity to speak privately with Elizabeth. "When we reach the soldiers," he explained, keeping his voice low, "you must convince them to intercept the settlers immediately. If they delay until morning, the settlers may find our camp first." Elizabeth nodded, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I'll make them understand the urgency." She hesitated. "But Running Wolf, what will happen when I leave with them? Will I see you again?" The question carried weight beyond the immediate circumstances. Running Wolf found himself without a clear answer, caught between tribal obligations and personal inclinations that had grown increasingly difficult to reconcile. "First, we ensure everyone's safety," he replied, deflecting the deeper implications. "Other questions must wait." They crossed the river carefully, each warrior leading his horse across the treacherous ice. Once on the eastern bank, they remounted and increased their pace, now moving through sparser woods that offered less protection, but faster travel. Approximately 3 miles from where scouts had reported the military encampment, one of the warriors raised his hand in warning. They halted instantly, listening intently. In the distance, the unmistakable sound of men's voices carried through the still night air. "Not from the soldiers' direction," Running Wolf observed quietly. "Coming from the south." Dismounting, he signaled the others to remain with the horses. While he investigated on foot, Elizabeth made to follow, but he gently restrained her. "Stay here," he whispered. "If trouble comes, ride east with the others. The soldiers can't be more than 2 miles beyond." Before she could protest, Running Wolf melted into the darkness between the trees. Moving with practiced silence across the snow, he approached the voices cautiously. Through a screen of pine branches, he observed a small group of men. 4 settlers, judging by their clothing and equipment, huddled around a meager fire. Their conversation carried clearly in the night air. "Thornton said we'd rendezvous at Eagle's Bluff before approaching their camp," one man was saying. "Thornton thinks he's leading a damn army," another replied, feeding a branch into their fire. 12 men against how many Indians? We should have brought the whole settlement. We're not here to start a war, countered the first speaker. Just to recover Miss Crawford, if she's still alive, and make it clear what happens when they interfere with our people. Peter wasn't just interfered with, a third man growled. Boy was killed crossing water. That's what Thornton says. But he doesn't know for certain. Could have been an accident. Running Wolf absorbed this exchange with growing concern. These men represented a splinter group from the main settler party, apparently in disagreement with their leader about tactics. Their conversation revealed not only misunderstandings about Elizabeth's situation, but active desire among some for violent confrontation. He retreated silently, returning to where Elizabeth and the warriors waited anxiously. 4 men from the settler group, he reported quietly. They've separated from the main party, but all head toward our winter camp. They believe you were captured after your guide was killed by Lakota warriors. Elizabeth's face paled in the moonlight. That's absurd. Peter drowned when the ice broke. Truth matters little when men seek justification for actions they've already decided to take, Running Wolf replied grimly. We must reach the soldiers. Immediately. These settlers intend violence regardless of what they find. They remounted and continued eastward at an increased pace, now racing against 2 threats, the main settler party approaching the Lakota camp from the south and the splinter group whose position potentially blocked their route to the military search party. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they descended toward the river valley where scouts had reported the soldiers' camp. Deep snow drifts alternated with icy patches where wind had scoured the ground bare. One warrior's horse stumbled badly, nearly throwing its rider. Though the animal recovered, it now moved with obvious lameness. We can't maintain this pace, Running Wolf decided reluctantly. 2 warriors will remain with the injured horse and make their way back to camp with warning about the splinter. A group, the rest of us continue to the soldiers. After brief discussion, 2 men prepared to depart westward, while Running Wolf, Elizabeth, and the remaining 2 warriors continued their journey east. The reduction of their party created new vulnerability, but necessity dictated their choice. They had traveled perhaps another mile when the distinct smell of wood smoke reached them, not the distant hint carried on air currents, but the immediate presence of nearby fires. Running Wolf signaled another halt, scanning the darkness ahead. Through gaps in the trees, the faint glow of a substantial encampment became visible. The soldiers, Elizabeth breathed, relief evident in her voice. Running Wolf nodded. We approach carefully. Military sentries shoot first when surprised at night. As they edged closer, the outline of military tents arranged in ordered rows confirmed. They had found their target. Running Wolf instructed one warrior to remain with the horses while he, Elizabeth, and the second warrior advanced on foot. When they were approximately 200 yards from the perimeter, Running Wolf cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hello, the camp," he called loudly. "We come peacefully." The reaction was immediate. Men emerging from tents, weapons readied, lanterns raised to pierce the darkness. A commanding voice rang out, "Identify yourselves and advance slowly." Elizabeth stepped forward. "I am Elizabeth Crawford, the missing teacher from Coleman's Ridge. I've come seeking assistance." Confusion and excitement rippled through the military camp. A tall figure strode forward, flanked by soldiers with rifles at ready. "Miss Crawford, step into the light where we can see you." Elizabeth moved forward, Running Wolf remaining close beside her, with their warrior companions slightly behind. As they entered the circle of lantern light, Running Wolf assessed their reception, a military officer, presumably the captain, regarding them with astonishment, while his men maintained weapons trained on the Lakota warriors. "My God," the officer exclaimed. "We thought you dead, Miss Crawford. Where have you been these past 2 months?" Elizabeth launched into the explanation they had prepared. "My wagon broke through ice during the December storm. Peter Jenkins drowned trying to save our supplies. I managed to reach shore, but would have frozen if not for travelers who found me. They took me northwest to their camp until I was strong enough to travel." The captain studied her with obvious skepticism, then shifted his gaze to Running Wolf. "And these travelers decided to return you just now?" "Captain," Elizabeth interrupted with urgency, "there's a more pressing concern. Armed men from Coleman's Ridge search for me with hostile intent. They believe I was captured by the Lakota and seek violent retribution." This information instantly transformed the officer's demeanor from skeptical to alert. "How many men? Where?" 12 approaching from the south, Running Wolf answered. Deciding directness served them best. Moving toward a Lakota winter camp. With women and children, they must be intercepted before dawn. The captain's eyes narrowed as he registered Running Wolf's accent and appearance more fully. "You're Lakota?" "Yes," Running Wolf acknowledged, maintaining eye contact. "I serve as scout and interpreter." "He saved my life," Elizabeth added firmly. "Captain, please. Innocent people will die if these settlers reach the Lakota camp. They're acting without authority and against my welfare." Indecision flickered across the officer's face, weighing military protocols against the urgency of the situation. After a moment's consideration, he turned to his lieutenant. "Prepare 2 squads to ride immediately," he ordered. "We'll intercept these civilians before they create an international incident." To Elizabeth, he added, "You'll remain here, Miss Crawford. I'll need a full accounting of your experience once we return." "I'm coming with you," she insisted. "These men will only believe I'm safe and unharmed if they see me themselves." Before the captain could object, shouting erupted from the camp's southern perimeter. A soldier ran toward them, rifle in hand. "Sir, riders approaching from the south. Civilians armed." The splinter group Running Wolf had observed earlier had apparently followed their tracks directly to the military camp. The timeline was collapsing, separate threats converging more rapidly than anticipated. "Get Miss Crawford to my tent," the captain instructed a nearby soldier. To Running Wolf, he added with thinly veiled warning, "You and your companion will remain under guard until this situation clarifies." Elizabeth resisted the soldier's attempt to lead her away. "Captain, listen to me. Running Wolf and his people have protected me, not harmed me. The danger comes from misunderstanding, not Lakota actions." The approaching riders entered the camp. Perimeter before further discussion could unfold. 4 men on exhausted horses, their faces reddened from cold and exertion, pulled up sharply at the sight of the assembled soldiers. Their expressions transformed from determination to shock when they spotted Elizabeth standing illuminated by lantern light. "Miss Crawford!" exclaimed the lead rider, a man in his 40s with a graying beard. "You're alive!" "Mr. Crawford," Elizabeth acknowledged, recognizing him as one of the settlement elders. "Yes, I'm quite well, as you can see." The man's gaze shifted to Running Wolf, his eyes narrowing with instant hostility. "She's with an Indian, just like Thornton suspected." "I'm with people who saved my life," Elizabeth corrected firmly, stepping forward. "Mr. Crawford, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. No one captured or harmed me. Peter drowned accidentally when our wagon broke through ice during the December storm." Crawford's expression remained suspicious, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "That's what they made you say," the captain intervened, his tone carrying military authority. "Mr. Crawford, I am Captain William Foster, 5th Cavalry. You and your companions are interfering with an official military operation. Where is the rest of your party?" Crawford hesitated before answering. approaching the Indian camp from the west. Should reach it by dawn. Captain Foster's expression hardened. Prepare all available men to ride immediately, he ordered his lieutenant. We must intercept this civilian action before it creates disaster. To Crawford he added sternly, you and your companions will accompany us to recall your associates. We who came for justice, Crawford protested. That Indian and his people killed Peter Jenkins and took our teacher. That is demonstrably false, Captain Foster countered, gesturing toward Elizabeth. Miss Crawford stands here unharmed and disputes your entire premise. Within 20 minutes, a column of soldiers with Elizabeth riding near the front alongside Captain Foster and Running Wolf, guiding from the lead position, departed the camp at urgent pace. Behind them, Crawford and his 3 companions rode under armed guard, their expressions reflecting mixture of confusion and resentment. Running Wolf set a course that would intersect the main settler party before they reached the Lakota camp. The night had passed its midpoint, temperature dropping further as the coldest hours approached dawn. Every rider's breath created clouds of vapor, their horses' flanks steaming with exertion. Elizabeth maneuvered her mount alongside Running Wolf, briefly, as they crossed a flat expanse of snow-covered prairie. Will we reach them in time? We should intercept them near Eagle's Bluff, he replied, studying the terrain ahead. As they crested a rise that offered views across the moonlit landscape, Running Wolf raised his hand, signaling the column to halt. In the distance, moving figures could be seen, perhaps a dozen men on horseback following the course of a frozen creek that would eventually lead them directly to the Lakota winter camp. There, Running Wolf pointed. Thornton's group, Captain. Foster assessed the situation quickly. We'll intercept them in that clearing ahead. Lieutenant, prepare the men. As the military column reorganized for the confrontation, Elizabeth moved her horse beside Running Wolf once more. In the moonlight, her expression conveyed both determination and something deeper. Whatever happens, she said quietly, I want you to know that my time with your people changed me in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Running Wolf met her gaze steadily. When this danger passes, there will be time for such reflections. She smiled slightly at his practical focus. Always the warrior, addressing immediate threats before personal considerations. Both matter, he acknowledged, but one must precede the other. The settlers halted abruptly when Captain Foster's military column emerged from the tree line. In the strange half-light that precedes dawn, blue shadows stretching across snow, the 2 groups faced each other across 50 yards of open ground. Captain Foster raised his hand, signaling his men to maintain position before urging his horse forward. Elizabeth rode beside him, her straight-backed posture and calm demeanor visible to all observers. I am Captain William Foster, 5th Cavalry, he announced. You men are conducting an unauthorized armed expedition into treaty territory. State your purpose immediately. The bearded leader nudged his horse forward to meet them. Samuel Thornton, sir, from Coleman's Ridge Settlement. We search for our missing teacher, Miss Elizabeth Crawford. His eyes widened as he registered Elizabeth's presence. Miss Crawford, thank the Lord you're alive. Elizabeth guided her horse slightly ahead of the captain's. Mr. Thornton, I appreciate your concern, but this expedition was unnecessary and dangerous. As you can see, I'm perfectly well. Thornton's expression shifted from relief to confusion. We believed you were captured after Peter failed to return. Peter drowned when the ice broke, Elizabeth explained, her voice carrying clearly to all the assembled men. I nearly died from exposure. Travelers found me and provided shelter until I recovered sufficiently to travel. Thornton's gaze drifted to Running Wolf. Travelers, he repeated flatly. You mean Indians? Captain Foster interjected firmly. Mr. Thornton, Miss Crawford has provided a full account of her experience to military authorities. No crimes were committed. No captivity occurred. Your armed party has no legitimate purpose here. As the captain continued explaining the situation to the increasingly subdued settlers, Running Wolf observed Elizabeth. Though exhaustion was evident in every line of her body, she maintained her composure with remarkable dignity. The teacher, who had crossed boundaries, geographical, cultural, personal, had emerged transformed just as she had claimed. In that moment, watching her bridge the divide between these two worlds, Running Wolf understood that some boundaries existed not to separate, but to be transcended by those with courage enough to cross them. Dawn broke across the eastern horizon, golden light transforming the snow-covered landscape. A new day beginning, with all its challenges and possibilities, and with it the promise of shared paths yet to be walked. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.